I started out as a kindergarten teacher, and the story about kindergarten teachers is that a kindergarten teacher can do everything with nothing. So we can make this work. Now I have to also tell you that it wasn't until a half an hour before I came that I realized that when Perry sent the information out about tonight, she assigned us minutes of time. And I've been given 10, and I'll try to keep it to that. But the funny thing is that Helen only was supposed to have 5. And I said to my family, Helen can't say her name in 5 minutes. So Perry has already mentioned that it was work that started while I was working at Student Advocacy Center that became the court-involved youth project. And that only became a possibility because of Judge Nancy Wheeler. And so the story goes, and now I need to tell you that it always depends on who tells the story, and I'm telling the story. So this may be an imperfect reality, but I'm telling the story and it's my reality. So it is my understanding, Nancy, and I have a funny story to tell you about that too. Shortly after Nancy became a judge on the bench, then there was an event at my house. It was probably a fundraiser for somebody that was running for something, probably her sister. And when she came into the house, I said, Judge Francis. And Alma said, oh my God. When they gave her a robe, they changed her first name. And I've never forgotten it. So when I say Nancy, it really is Judge Francis, but I'm not allowed to say that. So it is my understanding that you took the bench about 1990. And that after you got involved in the juvenile court, you were a little dismayed about the lack of educational services that were being provided, lack to none, of the kids that were before you. And there were lots of reasons why. And in the early 90s then, the Ford Foundation came through with a pretty sizable grant for a national organization that actually Ruth had co-founded with somebody else, but I can't remember the name. And so they gave us 5 years of funding, and we were to identify the most underserved, educationally underserved population of children in our jurisdiction. And Judge Francis right away said, it's the kids involved in my court. And so I then became the person that was to interface and work on that project, and I loved every minute of it. And the reason I got involved in the first place was because back in 1990, and it hadn't been very long, I got a call from Priscilla Cheever, who had been Nancy's former law partner. And she was working with a young man who was in junior high and was having a terrible time with the school being unwilling to serve him in any capacity. And she said, I can't take the case because he's before Judge Francis, and I can't take the case. Judge Wheeler, I gotta change my verbiage. I'm sorry about that, Nancy. I'll work on it. You were Francis at the time. But at any rate, so she said, would I do this? Because I've been doing advocacy for several years for kids in Ypsilanti, as Ruth had been doing in Ann Arbor. And our friend from Detroit, our criminal from Detroit. So I said, sure, I take it. So that put me into the court situation because this child was involved with the court. And so we started working, and we ended up getting a special program put in place for this child. And lo and behold, as soon as they put that program into place, come and find out, there was a whole bunch of kids that needed that program. Can you believe it? And so as time moved on then, we did quite a bit of work to improve the educational delivery system that was happening at the detention center, and with a lot of persuasion, the ISD decided that in fact it really was their responsibility, and so they hired a full-time social worker who they placed at the youth home, and that person her responsibility was to be sure that individual educational plans were being implemented for kids that came into the youth home that had special needs, and then eventually the ISD also provided the trained staff that provided the education there, and for any young person that was in the youth home that did not have an IEP, then it was the responsibility of the social worker there to evaluate and create a plan, not to certify. That was not the goal. The goal was to figure out what the child needed and see that a plan was in place, and then provide support services and I can't say the word, and plans for transitioning. That's the word I'm looking for. Transition services when the young person was going back to their local school. Okay, well that started with kids that were obviously on the delinquency side of the docket. And while I was doing that, then there are people here who know that I did a lot of work with the juvenile court staff. And I always said to them when we go into a meeting, if we need a good cop and a bad cop, I'm always going to be the bad cop. So if the detention staff or if the probation staff wants to play nice, that's fine. We'll still get the job done, and we did. So we did that. The project was, like I said, it started out being 5 years, and so that we did that for the first couple of years, and then Judge Wheeler said, I think it would be a good idea if we looked at the kids that are on the other side of the docket, abuse and neglect. So that opened up a whole new thing, and I confess, I went into this very blind, and I thought, oh, this will be a breeze. These are not kids that have been in trouble. These are kids that, yeah, well, I was wrong. It was much, much, much more complicated. But at any rate, we did the same. We did the same kind of thing with the foster care staff, and eventually it was DHS then. Now DHS. They provided SAC with an office so that we could be there on site and consult with the foster care workers and also train them. And we also reviewed all of the educational records that came in on the kids that were under their care, and tried to fill in the blanks because there were many where educational records were missing. And so we would try to get those records and then make plans for what was going to be the best thing for them. And then, as Perry mentioned, but I understand this is no longer the case. We got foster care kids identified in Washtenaw County by all of the school districts as homeless. And the basis on which I argued that was that a kid in foster care is not in a permanent placement. And so by the definition of their placement, they are homeless. And so we got people to agree, and that put into play the McKinney-Vento Act, which was a piece of federal legislation that grants all kinds of rights to homeless families, but more specifically, children. And so the important thing was that if a child placement changed, they got to stay in the school they were enrolled in.
That still happens.
Huh?
That still happens with some very different.
Oh, good. I'm so glad, because I was told that we can no longer identify kids in foster care as homeless. Yeah, well, I wish I'd have been around then. Tell me it's not. But anyway, I'm glad to know that that is in fact still happening, because when I heard that last week, I thought, the other things that happened with Nancy's insistence, and let me tell you, it was a blessing because I knew that I had the backing of the court, and that's a lot of backing. So one of Nancy's orders for kids was always that they had to attend school. So if a school decides we don't want this kid and we're going to suspend them, expel them, or give them a vacation, which they sometimes call it, that wasn't okay, and it was violating her court order. So more than once, we pulled a school system in on a show cause before the judge to explain to her why they were making the child violate her orders. And almost in all cases, she would say, all right, I want you all to go to the side room and work out an agreement and come back and tell me what you've worked out. Oh, that was very effective. And then the thing that was probably the most fun, we did that lots of times. I enjoyed that, really, I did. Then we also brought and I don't know the name, there's people here, Bill for sure, the Michigan High School Athletic Association. That's not right. What is it? Is that right? Is that close? Okay. They have all kinds of rules, about who can play, how long they have to be in school, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, well, on occasion, and maybe not as rarely as we might hope, a kid would move to another school and they wouldn't have been in that school long enough. But Nancy decided that in order to have that child, one big thing to keep that child engaged in school was to play sports. Oh, well, you couldn't do that in Michigan Athletics. They wouldn't let that happen. So she actually brought him to court. And she challenged that, and we won. We won that one. Okay, so 5 years went by, and court money dried up, but the court and DHS and SAC kept the program going until Judge Francis was moved to divorce court. And I could go on and on about that, but I would diverge. And so I'll skip that part. But at any rate, I am very glad to know the Student Advocacy Center is still working with kids that are court involved, however you've worked that out.
Wave your hands back there, who's doing that?
Yay for you. Bravo. So, with that, thank you very much, Nancy.